Welcome back. So today's prompt is cultural influences, and I wanted to start off by talking about cultural appropriation first. Now, this is something that's been discussed a lot, especially I think in the last few years more so than ever before. And I'm gonna premise my entire video by saying that everybody's opinion is different. Duh. I am going to give you my opinion, and I am not trying to convince anyone, and I am not trying to condemn anybody. I am just doing that, which is giving you my opinion. I could read the definition of cultural appropriation to make this, I guess, a cleaner cut video, but I don't feel like that's going to really take us anywhere, because I assume that most of us kind of have an idea of what that is, but struggle with knowing where is that line, so I think that there is a very big difference between cultural appropriation in the way that it becomes offensive and cultural appreciation. Also, I don't believe all appropriation is bad, and maybe that can lead to an even longer video at a later date. But appropriation itself can be a negative or positive. It is a neutral term. But the way that it's been used when combined with the word cultural, it carries a negative connotation, which is understandable. Now, I feel that for the longest time, us as a people did not do the best when it came to, treating specific groups of people fairly. So it went from, let's just say some specific cultural group of people and people that don't belong there, or that are in a better position socially, economically, culturally than they are. And these people are being mistreated. And then now we're trying to even it out by doing this. I am not trying to say that this group of people here has become the bad or the enemy, because it is not on them. I feel like it is a lot of the times people that are not even part of those groups that are trying to remedy the damage that they did. And sometimes that's not really helping the movement or the situation or that whole goal that they're actually trying to achieve. Those are my initial thoughts. So as I mentioned before in my heritage video, both of my parents were born in Mexico, are Mexican, and I was raised around that culture. How do I feel about somebody that would want to borrow from my culture, if you will? Really depends on how they're doing the borrowing. And this, I think the best way to explain it is by giving an example of something that I am not a fan of, which is taunting and bullying. So if someone is borrowing from the culture, the Mexican culture, and they are doing it in a way that isn't to make fun of it or to bully someone, I don't have a problem with it. Sometimes I think that a lot of people say, oh, they're not even giving credit. That really becomes an issue when the credit is not given. And let's just say this person now tries to make money off of somebody else's culture without being a part of their culture or giving back to that community or that culture. I am not 100% on any of these things right now. because I think so many of these things are situational, and a conclusion can only be arrived to knowing a very specific situation, and it comes down to personal feelings, morals, and ethics. And that is how I kind of navigate the situation. Because also for the longest time, I didn't really want to be a part of my own culture. I felt like an outsider in my own culture. And if I'm not allowed to borrow or be a part of or learn from other cultures, only my own, but I don't want my own, I can't have anything, seemed very fucked up. When it comes to cultural appropriation or appreciation or any of the above terms, those are my final thoughts right now. Maybe my opinions will change later. Maybe they won't. And like I said, I think most, if not all of these situations are very unique. And there is no way that you can blanket something under those terms being as just wrong or just right. And I also brought up not wanting to be a part of my culture because I think that I felt guilt for that. And I also felt like I was being so ungrateful because a lot of people wanted to have a culture like that, or they expressed that they wish that they were more in touch with their culture and they weren't, and I didn't want it. I also want to share this because I see a lot of people speak about being proud of being Mexican or their culture, and I love that, but no culture is perfect. And there are so many things that I hated about my culture because they were either representations of or reminded me of the patriarchal dominance in the culture. So it took me a lot of years to come around that. Just like it took me, years to be okay with talking about Catholicism or Christianity and not being mad about it. And that was huge growth for me because I didn't want to become bitter about any of it. I didn't want to be like, okay, so I used to be part of this, but now I'm part of this and I'm mad at that side all the time. Like, I wanted to have peace. Now, I'm sorry if I repeat myself throughout the video, but I am trying to be as clear as possible. And now I think is a good time to start talking about my cultural influences in the craft. I hope I didn't feel like I left people hanging off a cliff with what I was just talking about, but I felt like my opinions on those subjects is something that I needed to express, especially because I haven't seen anybody that is first generation with Mexican parents speaking about these in a pagan or witchy space. If you know people like that, then please let me know of them, because I don't know any, and that's part of the reason why I felt that I had to say these things. Without further ado, let's talk about my actual practice and my spirituality. So like I mentioned before a couple of different times in different videos, I think, I was born and raised into a Catholic family. My grandmother on my father's side was the closest thing that she could become in the Catholic Church without becoming a nun. She taught catechism. She taught all of my cousins, even the cousins on my mom's side, catechism, and helped them do their first communion and everything. So she was very, very involved with the church. On my mother's side, that grandmother I didn't see quite often because she wasn't living in the US. She would come and visit, but she was mainly living in Mexico. So I didn't really have a whole lot of influences from her in that realm at a young age. When we ended up moving away and no longer living with my grandmother that taught catechism, we still went to church every single Sunday. But I started feeling like as a child, I never felt connected. I felt like I was just trying to like not be bored when I was in church. I was just trying not to be bored. When we ended up moving even further away from the family, we started going to a church where I currently live in this city. And by then I was a preteen, and I started really trying to pay attention to the service. And I started having a lot of questions, and even though I didn't seek them with any particular individual, I was not liking what I was hearing. And it just seemed like I couldn't really reconcile what I was listening with the identity of who I was becoming. So I knew that that was not the space for me. And also, coincidentally, at the same time, my mom also started pulling away from the church and started exploring studying the Bible with one of my other aunts, who at that time and still is a Jehovah's Witness. So we went down that rabbit hole. My mom continued on, loved it, and studied the Bible extensively, and she still does. I got intrigued because I loved the idea of being able to actually study the text instead of having to blindly go somewhere and just listen and take whatever they had to say in like absolute truth. I love that they encouraged questions, and I began studying the Bible with somebody that was a witness. And I did that for a year. And I stopped because I felt like I was being pushed into something that I didn't want to do. And to me, the Bible was just like any other book. Like, I'm studying this and I'm learning from this and I'm taking it into consideration, but I never saw it as like, this is the way that I'm going to live my life, or this is the way that I have to live my life. That's just how I approached it, and that's how I felt, and that's how I feel now. Just like I do with majority of my books, of other spiritual systems, beliefs, faiths, you name it. That was kind of like the religion chapter of cultural influences. I kind of now want to move on to cultural influences in terms of the people that were in my life growing up, because they did influence my path. The first person I want to mention was my uncle and godfather. He's already passed. He passed when I think I was like 12. So he's passed a long time ago, but I'm gonna try to keep it together. He was such a positive influence in my life for so many reasons, and I could make probably an hour-long story video about him, but I'm not going to right now. But one of the most important takeaways is he taught me how fun it was to be yourself and to express yourself with fashion, with hair, with makeup. He taught me that it was not only bad to mistreat people, but that if you saw somebody being mistreated, that you should step in and do something about it. And I witnessed him doing those things. There was a specific situation where we were leaving a market, and there was a couple walking by, and there was a car of guys that were taunting this couple. Now, at that time, I didn't, like, in that moment, I didn't know, but later on, he told me that man and the woman were actually a trans couple, and they were being taunted and bullied by these men in this car because they were a transsexual couple. And I remember my uncle taking us by the car and telling us to stay there. And I saw him take off and go to this car full of men. I mean, I don't know. They could have had weapons. They could have just jumped out and like done major harm. They could have even killed him. And he didn't care. Like, he went over there and started yelling at them and telling the couple that they had nothing to be ashamed about. And it was just, I just wish that I had as much courage as I witnessed him having. And I mean, he died, he was so young. He died at the age of like 34. And oh man, he was just such an important person for me. And everybody in the family mourns him all the time. Like, it's not just me, especially the women. You know, he was a hairstylist, he was a makeup artist, he was a fashion designer. He was so much to so many of us. I think that's all I'm gonna say about him, because I'm just gonna keep crying. I keep talking about him. So my other relatives that have influenced me, I'm gonna specifically talk about my great-grandmother. Now, my great-grandmother on my mom's side, I didn't really know anything about until my grandmother started actually staying longer with us in the US and not going back to Mexico right away. And I learned a lot about my grandmother because of that, and that's even a story for another day. But I learned that my great-grandmother was a healer, and I didn't know that. Like, that wasn't told to me until I was already like in my 20s. I knew that she helped deliver babies, but I didn't understand like what that meant, and I didn't even care when I first found out. I didn't explore it enough. And as I became more in tune with myself and wanting to know more about my cultural influences and wanting to know more about my ancestors, I started digging, and I had a lot of questions to ask my grandmother about my great-grandmother. And she was known as a partera, which is a midwife. And she then proceeded to tell me a bunch of different stories about my great-grandmother. But she was also a yerbera, which is an herbalist. And by the stories that she told me, I feel very comfortable labeling my my great-grandmother a curandera, which would be a Mexican folk healer. But yeah, so finding that out was kind of like a confirmation that I was on the right path, because I felt like I wanted to help heal, and I felt like I wanted to help other people, but I didn't know how, and I felt like I didn't belong in those spaces. And it was just a lot of like trying to find who I was, what I believed in, what can I be a part of. Like, I was just putting so many limits on things and just trying to find things that made sense with me at the same time. And finding out that she was a healer kind of confirmed that for me, because it made me feel like this was something that was supposed to be passed down, and it got lost because of my grandma's life, which if I told you, you would understand. But it made me now go down that rabbit hole and find out as much as I could about curanderismo, or Mexican folk healing. So now I'm proud to say that, you know, what I once didn't want to know anything about, I ended up embracing with open arms, because it felt like it actually did belong to me, or like part of me. And now I have like a shelf, not on this side, but like on this side of my room, a shelf full of Mexican folk magic or folk healing books. And my sister, who actually is a Chinese medicine doctor, she knows a lot about herbs, a lot of Chinese herbs, but we have recently been getting together to study and learn more about more of the Mexican healing herbs, and also native to America healing herbs. So that's been like a really cool thing to be able to actually do and feel like we even had a right to do it. But it took a while to get there. It took a while to get there. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of searching and questioning, not only like just the material, but identity of ourselves and where we were at in these spaces and what it meant to be what and why it made sense for us to be dabbling in the things that we were dabbling in. So yeah, cultural influences. My cultural influences come a lot from who raised me. And although it made me angry when I was younger because I didn't understand the whole of it, only the part that I didn't like, I'm really glad that I eventually came around to it all. But I am not also going to sit here and say that my goal is to only practice Mexican folk magic or Mexican folk healing or to be a curandera, because I like so much of the different aspects of the craft and what different cultures have to offer it. Which brings me to another reason why I shared my 23andMe results. A part of me wanted to join the bandwagon and hate the European side of me because of what it represented to the indigenous part of me. And I didn't know what to do with that because I didn't feel like it was healthy for me to hate half of myself. And I understand that not everyone that was Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, was a horrible person. And it took me thinking about it in more of a spiritual and magical sense of things to be okay with embracing all of that. I saw persecution of men and women, but, I saw the persecution of these so-called witches and practitioners in every single one of these places. And it was very heartbreaking. And it didn't matter if it was somebody affected by the Spanish Inquisition or affected by the forced conversion to Catholicism. It was just all so sad. And I realized it's not that I had to hate the European side of me to feel like I was doing justice by my indigenous side, but that I had to heal within all of those spaces, within all of those regions, the part that had been persecuted, and show up as authentically as possible and do it relentlessly, especially in the space that I'm proud to say that we can hold today compared to hundreds of years ago and even 10 years ago. I feel like there is strength in numbers. And for the longest time, I was scared to even show any of my spiritual side on any space. To say that now I'm making videos practically daily about it is such an empowering and beautiful thing. And that's another reason why I don't want to condemn people that are, inspired by or borrowing from my culture, because I would rather us fight against what's the true enemy together than have these smaller differences tear us apart and have them win again. I want there to be true freedom of religion and expression of that spirituality or religion all around. I am very appalled by the fact that a lot of us have to still work in the shadows and think twice about what we say for fear of persecution. And I'm sick of it. I don't go around knocking on people's doors and asking them to hear me out. And I don't go around writing comments that are nasty to people whose belief systems don't align with mine. And the only other thing that I think is fair to ask is the same in return.